Hello there, listening audience. This is Michael Cross here for another episode of Unlock the Door Radio, where we like to ask the questions that the mainstream media tends to overlook, or for some reason they just don't deal with a lot of stuff that's of major importance in the world today. And one of those issues we're going to discuss tonight is going to be artificial intelligence and how it applies to weaponization. In other words, weaponized drones and robots and those kinds of things. And we have a very distinguished guest tonight. He's on the NGO titled the International Committee for Robot Arms Control. He is a noted science writer. He's editor for Artificial Intelligence Review and also editor-in-chief of Connection Science. And that's Noel Sharkey from Ireland. Hello, Noel.
Hello, Mike. How are you today?
Pretty good. Hopefully everything's going well for you, too.
Yep, it's a lovely day here for once.
Okay. Well, then, let's just kind of jump in here. Now, the issue... Well, let me just back up a little bit. My daughter and I were watching the original Terminator series the other day, and like it was 1985. They had all of these flying drones and that sort of thing. And, you know, back in 1985, you never even would imagine that there would be autonomous drones and so forth. It seems science fiction-y, but it's not really science fiction anymore, is it?
Not really. I mean, we're not quite at the Terminator stage, though, because there was a time machine involved and that sort of stuff. But I saw that movie in 1985 as well, and I loved it. It was one of my favorite movies of all time, really. It was so good. And little did I know that, 10 or 15 years later, I was going to actually be working on the issue for serious. I saw it very clearly as fiction in those days. Robotics really wasn't up to that kind of level of working, and it still isn't, in fact.
Okay, so it seems though that we're on the trail to getting there, though, aren't we? I mean, is this one of the reasons why you've become so active in, basically robot arms control?
Well, I actually became active for a slightly different reason. I was at an interview in 2006. I was running a press conference on our government's take on robot ethics, which was to give robots housing benefits in 50 years' time, and it seemed ludicrous to me. So I was at this press conference, and one of the press asked me about military robots, and of course I knew nothing about them or military. And so that evening I went off to the internet to have a quick read, find out, what it was about, so that I could answer questions. That read took about 6 to 9 months. I was really shocked by what I read, because the plans that I was reading, I read all the roadmaps, thousands of pages of military roadmaps from the US, all talking about autonomous robot weapons. And it seemed to me that these guys were really living in a land of science fiction. They didn't really realize the limitations of the machines. Sure, you can build a big machine. It's not hard to build a big machine that will go out and kill people, but can it comply with international humanitarian law? That's the laws of war, Geneva Convention and all the treaties. And one of the things is the principle of distinction is the cornerstone of that. And in my view, at that time, certainly there was no robot or AI system that could distinguish between a civilian and a combatant, between a child and a combatant. I mean, it was not possible. So how the hell were these things going to work? And that really set my alarm bells ringing. And so I started thinking about it, studying the laws of war and, international humanitarian law, and have not been able to leave it since.
Well, it seemed, okay, you're a professor of artificial intelligence and robotics. And, I mean, you know probably the course we're on. I mean, you can make a distinction between what, the science fiction fantasy and the cold hard facts, where we're at now and where we're going to be in a few years. And how close do you think we are to creating drones that think for themselves, or even robots?
Well, it depends on what you mean by thinks for itself. I mean, what we're very close to is robot planes or autonomous weapons weapon systems being driven by algorithms. I mean, essentially that's what it's about. The idea of it thinking is a whole sort of intellectual issue. But certainly the idea of a machine flying along, selecting targets and killing them without any humans being involved is very clearly on the developmental plans, particularly of the US. China also have vehicles being developed, so do Israel, and so do the UK. I mean, they've already got machines. There's the X-47B, okay, that's a sort of, it looks like something Batman would fly. It's a small unmanned fighter jet, completely autonomous. It's been tested taking off and landing on US aircraft carriers, and it can also be refueled in the air. Now, I don't know about artificial intelligence. It's a pretty dumb machine, but it can do a lot of things. It can land, take off, and fly. And the idea there is to have swarms of these things, because the problem for the US is they're outgunned in the Pacific. They know that. There was a Rand Corporation report that was quite clear that the US could not win a war in the Pacific. If every bullet they had, every missile they had hit targets, they would still be so outgunned. So one of the big ideas is you have swarms of autonomous vehicles that one person can send off from 1,000 miles away from aircraft carriers, and they can swarm in and do a lot of destruction. So that's the real fear. I mean, the super intelligent AI, or that kind of smart AI, I don't know. I mean, it's some way off in the future, I think. And in the meantime, you're going to have these really dumb algorithms automated to kill people, and that's the really scary bit that we're trying to deal with at the UN at the moment.
Okay, so what you're talking about when you said this swarms, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Ender's Game.
No, I haven't seen that one, strangely.
Okay, well, it's, you know, you just have these thousands and thousands and thousands of alien spaceship, and it's like a swarm. And is that kind of what the U.S. is looking for? Like if you go up against, I don't know, 100 Chinese fighters, then you would send up, 1,000 of these small drones that would attack those fighters?
That's the sort of fantasy there is. And not just that, people are also talking about, the Center for New American Security has been talking about the idea of having rafts full of autonomous missiles. So they go out, the fighter jets come in, do all this work in swarms, and they also have these missiles. It's pretty scary stuff for a lot of reasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing I would look at is that, in a war situation, there's kind of that idea that, well, it's part of the Geneva Conventions, although it's been ignored, I think, in every war, at least in some ways, is that you have the human element that can kind of say, okay, stop. I mean, let's say you're in a war situation and the other side has been, I mean, their capability has been destroyed. Do you have a fear that these swarms, these robots, would then just go ahead and just finish everyone off, just, clean up whatever mess was still there, rather than thinking, okay, well, I mean, even Hitler at Dunkirk, let the British soldiers evacuate instead of just mowing them down on the beach. Instead of, in those days, if you'd had robots that would have been, sent out with the mission of, vanquish this army, I don't know if that would have been the case.
Well, you're hitting on a really important topic here, because there's a lot of confusion about this. Because on the one hand, one of the big reasons that's cited all the time by the militaries is that, if you have a drone as it stands now and you're fighting a sophisticated enemy, the first thing they're going to do is jam all the communications. So the idea of these autonomous things is they will still be able to complete their mission without communications. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of talk that people will send in a swarm, but there'll be somebody watching them through the nose cameras on the machines. And then what they will do is call them back if they're doing anything dangerous. But you can't have it both ways. If it's designed to work without communications, it will work without communications. So what you're saying, you send them on a mission to do a lot of killing. And if communications are broken, you won't be able to call them back. But it gets worse, actually, because one of the big problems is, and this is another reason why, I'm not trying to scare people here. I mean, it might sound like scaremongering, but it's what's going on, is the idea that you send these things out, they have no communications, and what they're going to do is attack the enemy. But all the plans you see are built based on the idea that the enemy's arsenals will stay as they are today. They're not thinking that the enemy are also developing swarms of robot-attacked vehicles. And that's one of the problems, because as a computer scientist, I can tell you, and any computer scientist will tell you, if you have two devices that have programs on them, and I don't know what's in the program, so I have no idea what their combat program is, it's going to be very secret, otherwise I'll be able to shoot them down without any trouble. If two swarms of these things meet, how can they pull the plug? Supposing China and US machines are locked in battle, destroying everything everywhere. Who's going to pull the plug first? Because everyone who pulls the plug first is going to lose. So they're going to have to let it go on. And that is really scary stuff to me anyway.
Okay, so you could have a situation where it's just like some sort of massive destruction on a scale that would even be, beyond Dresden or something like that. I mean, just
Oh, certainly, yes. Well, it wouldn't be as bad as a nuclear explosion, but, people aren't using those. They might use these in a different kind of way. They use them.
Okay.
Now, there is talk. I mean, the sort of arguments that are going on are, it is possible to use them in very limited ways. I mean, militaries throughout the world, and particularly the US, are really thinking about cost cutting all the time. So the idea is that people are saying, well, you could use them in very limited ways. We won't use them in every possible way. We'll use them in very limited ways. And for instance, one of these X-47B things could go out instead of a cruise missile. So you give a cruise missile coordinates, it flies to the coordinates and blows them to pieces, essentially. But what you could do with these autonomous drones, give them the coordinates, send them off. They fire two Hellfire missiles at a bridge, which costs $38,000 each, instead of a $2 million cruise missile. So that would be the kind of way of thinking. And people say, well, that's as far as it will go. But of course, we all know that once you've fielded weapons like this, as soon as anything really serious happens, if many nations have them, we'll start using them in all kinds of ways. And that's the sort of fear, really.
Okay, yeah. So, once you get it applied to one field in the military, you're going to use it in all the others because you're going to try to find innovations.
Yes, that's what happened with. You can look at what happened with aircraft, aerial bombardment. I mean, back in 1938, Roosevelt, the American president, wrote to all the major European nations in 1938 saying, please don't use aerial bombardment. Don't bomb people from the air because it's the most indiscriminate form of warfare you can have. So don't do it. We have no treaties against it, but it would not be in anybody's interest to do it. 6 years later, the United States, or 7 years later, the United States was dropping nuclear bombs on Japan. So that's how quickly these things develop when there's a major conflict. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 6 years is a very short time when you're talking historically. I heard one of your other interviews where you were saying that you were at some sort of, a military arms convention or something like that. And the idea was brought up, well, what happens when there's no more war? And people were joking about the idea that, well, you would just have to form another war.
Oh, I know what you're saying. Yes, it was an AUVSI, which is Autonomous Vehicles conference, but it's a massive fair, and there were about 2,000 manufacturers there. And so I said to people in a semi-joking way, because these people were making all kinds of weapons, and it's not people making weapons. There's thousands of little companies who make sensors, who make tiny components for all of these weapons. So they're all really relying on a war economy. So Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. They really help the US economy greatly. And so I went around and said to people, well, what are you going to do? What's your company going to do when these wars end? And one of them jokingly said, oh, we'll just start another war. Ha ha ha. Big joke. And so I thought, I'm going to ask more people. And I went round and asked everybody I could find. I didn't ask 2,000 people, probably about 15 or 20. But everybody I asked made exactly the same joke. And I thought, well, that's really worrying. Is this what it's really about? Is it about big money? Is it about companies making fortunes out of warfare? Are we going to have to keep having wars so that people can make money? And autonomous weapons, the competition for making them from the manufacturers is going to be so vast. I mean, the competition for making drones, the Israel AI, which is the Israeli aeronautical industries, have opened offices all over South America now to sell drones. China's pushing very hard to sell them. The US is in there. Europe's in there. And what happens when everybody's trying to sell is they have to keep putting bells and whistles on to get ahead of the competition. And one of the great ways to get ahead of the competition is to offer more and more autonomy. At the moment, and people don't realize this, when someone's flying a drone, they're not flying it all the time. What they do is they set waypoints. So I will give it GPS coordinates. It will fly there. When it gets there, then I can start manipulating it and bringing it down and looking for targets. So there is a lot of autonomy in there already, and that's the direction that's being pushed.
Mm-hmm.
And also, let me just say, which we haven't said, is we've been talking about these flying machines, but it's not just flying machines. The US also have the Crusher, which is a 7.5-ton sort of tank-like truck. It's fully autonomous. The DARPA, this is the Defense Advanced Project Research Agency, which is the research wing of the Pentagon, have been developing a lot of stuff. They're in phase 2 of an autonomous submarine hunting submarine that just goes under the ocean looking for other submarines, and then it can sink them. They're already under the water, but you know what I mean, it can destroy them. They've also working on swarms of boats, so you have these, I've seen demos of them. You have a ship at sea and suddenly all these boats surround it and close in on it, and that's swarming boats. And they're talking about using those for border control and that kind of agency.
Wow. So
it's happening in all land, air, sea, and under the water, everywhere.
Yeah, because that could change everything. I mean, the age of aircraft carriers would be pretty much gone, because then you'd be able just to, again, like a science fiction movie, just send in all these little ships that would pick at it until it's actually sunk.
Yeah, and there's no way. I mean, we don't really know how it will change things, because, as I say, other people will have them. We're not sure what's going to happen here. I can't picture it. What's going to happen when everybody has them? I mean, China and Russia are certainly in development as well. So, as well as other countries. And I know I've heard from secret sources that there are other countries who are developing them, but I can't say anything about that.
Okay. I heard something the other day. There was a presentation on C-SPAN, and
yes.
the Colonel John, Petkosek, talking for AP Hill. And the title was, the U.S. Army Asymmetric Warfare Training. And the thing is that he said that was really interesting was that some of the stuff they like to do is use autonomous robots in role play situations. So soldiers, they dress them up, and then, are we beyond the point of the mobile toaster oven, which is a lot of the stuff you see on YouTube if you type in DARPA? Does the military, was this just some sort of disinformation he threw out there, or misspeaking, or do we now have actual robots, not maybe as fancy as Terminator, but certainly not the ones you see sometimes on YouTube or a science show?
I'm not really sure what he meant. I mean, what you've got robots for testing kit that you put on a treadmill and will run so it can test if it makes sweat or, how it operates. So there's a lot of that going on. And there's the DARPA Grant Rescue Challenge, which they're trying to develop these humanoid robots, which are not very good at the moment at all. They keep falling over and stuff. I mean, they don't work very well. Google has bought most of the companies now, the good ones. But we're not really at that stage, except that since the very beginning, and you won't believe this, 1912 was the first drones. And they were called drones because what they do is they were remote control planes that the US used for target practice. So that's very similar. You send them up in the air, you fly them around, and people shoot at them. And they also had, at that time, remote control battleships. They didn't actually think of using them in warfare, but they were very good for target practice, if that's what you're thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have a humanoid robot that ran about with a suit on and got shot at, yes.
Okay. Still a little bit more advanced than most people would realize, though. I mean, not Terminator, but something a little bit more advanced. Speaking of soldiers, though,
Yes.
I think you've commented on the idea that if you had an uprising in a country, that if you develop robots that will take on police military functions, that, well, for instance, we all remember the pictures from Tiananmen Square when the guy goes out in front of the tank. Most people, forget the fact that the tank driver was trying to avoid him. He was moving around, he was trying not to hit the protester. You remember that, right?
Hello?
Oh yeah, I think I lost you there for a second.
I lost you completely. I didn't hear the question.
Okay.
So you better fire that again.
Let me back up a little bit. At Tiananmen Square, when that famous scene with the protester in front of the tank, if you see the video, the tank driver is still human. I mean, he's trying to avoid the protester. He's trying to veer around him so he doesn't hit him. When you had military just after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and Yeltsin goes out and talks to the military and persuades them not to, take over the government, you had a human factor that is involved. It seems in the future, if you have autonomous or some sort of machine police or cops, they're not going to have that human factor, and they may just go ahead and do whatever they're being ordered to do at Central Command.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you saw the same in Egypt when the Egyptian Rising, the Egyptian forces refused to fire on civilian protesters because people identify with their own nation. They don't want to kill people. But you program a bunch of robots. I mean, they're being programmed in a bunker, so the people who are programming them aren't looking at faces and thinking, I'm going to kill my own people. And then you let them go. And, an authoritarian dictator can use them very easily. But it can be more sinister than that. I mean, not more sinister, but it's already starting to happen. It's not just authoritarian dictators. I'm quite concerned about creeping authoritarianism within our own great democracies, because these devices, we're already seeing police using drones everywhere. In South Africa, a company called Desert Storm has just sold these quadcopters to 25 mining companies so they can control protesting miners. They're equipped with pepper spray and they fire plastic balls. So that's to stop protest. And they say they've sold them to 25 companies throughout the world. Not 25 companies, 25 police forces. So these could be used for border control, all sorts of things. They call these less than lethal weapons, but they can kill people and maim them. So this kind of thing is not good. And there's a company in Texas called Chaos, and they have a robot called Cupid. Again, it's a quadcopter, and it's called Cupid because it hovers over your property in Texas. If somebody enters the property, it says, get off the property. If they don't go, it fires a taser dart at them and keeps them under electric shock until the authorities or the owner comes back. And you can kill people that way. I mean, it's really bad. You can see this all on YouTube if you go and look. They've got the office intern being electrocuted there. So this kind of civil rights abuse is already beginning to happen, and that is a great worry. Because once you've equipped authorities with these, what will they do with them? I don't know. I mean, I have faith in our democracies, but you can never tell what happens in future generations. You get a new government every 4 or 5 years. What about 5 or 6 governments down the road that's being left with these things? And suddenly there's a lot of strikes or protests against the government. Would it be a temptation? Possibly.
Yeah, it seems like, we don't go from stage 1 to stage 2 dictatorship. I mean, if you compare where we've gone just in the last 10 years, I mean, 10 years ago, if you'd have mentioned to people that their cell phones are being listened to by the NSA or British intelligence, they would have thought you were insane. Now it's just like,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
I know they're listening, and people accept it.
Yes. Yes, it seems to be quite acceptable. I mean, we're certainly doing it very heavily in the UK, and the government have made it very clear, and the new government, they're not going to stop it. They think this is a good thing. They don't think about how it can be abused, because laws are never specified really clearly enough, and that's one of the problems. But look, we're really trying hard to do something about this. It's not that this is just being left here and scaring people, because 2 years ago, I'm chairman of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control, and that was founded in 2009 with the simple mission of raising public awareness and getting international discussion among nations together. And we managed to get a lot of conversations going out there, talking to the military, writing a lot of articles. We're a group of academics, but we didn't manage to really get international discussion going. And then eventually, a group of NGOs came to us, Human Rights Watch primarily, and said, look, this sounds very interesting. Come and talk to us. So I went and gave a lecture to a bunch of NGOs who were celebrating the banning of anti-personnel landmines. And so a group of 9 of us at that point, and a bunch of Nobel laureates, Nobel Laureates Initiative, Human Rights Watch, Article 36, Landmine Action Canada, International Committee for Robot Arms Control, Pugwash, another Nobel laureate-winning NGO, got together and started the campaign to stop killer robots that was launched from the UK Parliament in April 2013. Now, 6 months later, with these guys on board, we were going to the UN now. We were lobbying people at the UN, talking to delegations, talking to ambassadors, and we managed to convince them to take this issue to this Convention for Certain Conventional Weapons. That's the CCW at the UN in Geneva. And that convention has the ability, what they're charged with, is to prohibit certain weapons that cause unnecessary suffering. So it took them 5 years to get them to listen about landmines, but it took us 6 months to get them to discuss it. They raised it. We talked about it. A lot of nations hadn't heard about this stuff and were really shocked. And the result was that we got an expert meeting in April 2014. I opened that with the debate. So we had that expert meeting then. They meet twice a year. So they meet in November again. They discuss all the issues and what are we going to do about this. And they decided they needed another expert meeting. So we just had one again this May, and they will meet in November to decide how to move forward. Now, at this point, about 7 nations have said we want an absolute ban. Many are saying we really think this is a very serious issue. We have to regulate it at the very least. We really have to think about it. So all the nations, 80 nations now have spoken up at the UN about it. And this is a very good thing. But the problem, and we will get, I'm sure we're going to get something here, whether it's going to be adequate or not, but we're going to get some sort of prohibition here. We're looking for an internationally legally binding treaty on autonomous killing machines, preventing them. But the problem here is that the CCW only deals with warfare and conflict. So even if we made it completely illegal to use in warfare, we wouldn't have stopped it being illegal for police to use. And tear gas is a good example of that. Tear gas is completely prohibited in warfare, but yet the police can use it. So what we would need to take this to the Human Rights Council at the UN. But a lot of nations, for some reason that we can't quite figure out, are blocking this. We can't get it through to the Human Rights Council. And we even have the UN Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings, Professor Christoph Haynes, who's delivered reports to the Human Rights Council and tried to get it through, but we're not. From 26 countries, and we're on a daily basis fighting really hard for this and lobbying. So you can support this, anybody. Just tell people about it. That's a good way to support it for a start. Go onto our website at icrack.net and look around there and educate yourself. But there are a group of people fighting to get this banned. That's the main thing.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I don't think any of us want to see a future of Skynet and Terminator and those kinds of things. We want a future for our kids and grandkids technology will be used for the betterment, not the destruction of human beings.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
I should finish on that note. Can we finish on that note? I mean, this won't be, you'll edit this bit out, won't you?
I sure did. Hey, thanks a lot, Professor Sharkey, for giving us your insights into this very critical issue.
Thank you very much, and it's been a real pleasure, and it's great questions, and it's good to be given the opportunity to get this out to a wider audience. Thank you.
All right. Well, you take care now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, that was a really, really excellent set of insights that Noel Sharkey gave in the first half of the show in regards to the fact that we have to keep an eye on government and how they use such things as new technologies. The idea that, we're developing autonomous weaponry, and we should make sure that we stay in control. Not just that humans themselves stay in control, but that the people have a say into how these technologies are used as we develop robots and drones and so forth that will increasingly become more, maybe thinking, maybe being able to carry on missions without absolute human control. I think there's some very major questions there we have to keep in mind, and we have to make sure that we don't just leave it into the hands of the various governments, because they're all trying to one-up each other and come up with new strategies, new weaponry, and so forth, which in many respects, who knows? It might actually wind up getting out of control. Who knows? I mean, we might have a Battlestar Galactica scenario where the robots finally take over and they don't necessarily like us. But anyway, getting more down to just what's going on this very day, and in reference to freedom and human rights and so forth, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of these issues and not take them for granted. You see, I think basic liberties are like health. You can get yourself in really great shape. I mean, you can go out and run and swim. Now, let's say you're training for a triathlon, and you get yourself in just superb shape. You do your triathlon, you're proud of your accomplishments and so forth. And then let's pretend that you just sit back and you don't do any exercise. Now, you put your plaque on the wall that says, you did a great job. Let's say you were first place in some competition. And people come over and they look at your plaque and they're like, wow, you won that triathlon. That is really impressive. And you're going, yeah, I'm in great shape. But let's say you're not keeping yourself in shape. Little by little, you're not eating right, you're not exercising anymore. Now, you're not going to suddenly go from triathlete to, just totally obese and out of shape and threatening your health overnight. It's not going to happen in a month, but it will happen eventually. It will creep in, and then you will wind up being something totally opposite of that triathlete you were. And human rights is very similar to that, because just because you have rights to freedom of speech and religion and in the case of the United States, own guns and all these other things, just because you have it today does not guarantee you have it tomorrow or next week or next year or in the next decade. Take a look what's happened in the last 10 years, or better yet, go back to 2001. So, you got about 12, 13 years there. Take a look at the way people see human rights. Take a look at the way we are basically just being indoctrinated into something totally different than what the United States was. We have, for instance, we go to the airport. Now, I'm not saying that they've never had airport security and that they don't have airport security in other countries, but we have like the TSA there, and there's all kinds of issues in regards to the way that they search people and, if that's right or not. And so, but that's something that people have kind of gotten used to, and the only thing that the people that support it have to do is suddenly scream 9/11, and, all of a sudden that just shuts everyone up. And, well, at least most of them. And then you have other issues. I mean, you have these, checkpoints. I remember I was actually involved in the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers campaigns in the 1980s when it first started. I thought drunk driving was horrible, that, there's this carnage on the roads. Many more children, for instance, die due to drunk drivers than from gun accidents in the United States. Many more. Okay, so if people are concerned about kids getting hurt and killed, they should be looking at what's happening on the road still. But in the 1980s, that's when you had the start of the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And I remember how controversial it was just to put up a police checkpoint in front of a bar that closes at like 2 a.m. I remember that was just super controversial, that you were pulling people over just because of the suspicion that they may have drank too much and now were getting on the road without having without observing anything like the car veering or any of these other telltale signs. Now, the interesting thing is, look at how we've evolved since then. You've got military checkpoints in the United States. You've got police checkpoints. You've got border patrol checkpoints, not just on the border, but, way into the interior. You've got these checkpoints. And essentially, it's getting people used to the idea that they should be stopped, and people dressed up in often paramilitary uniforms with, well, not even paramilitary. I mean, essentially they are paramilitary if they're the police, but then they're dressed up in, uniforms. But if they're dressed in actual uniforms, I mean, that's what you see coming at you. And then you've got the idea that, the idea they could just basically immediately ask you for your ID, even though essentially there's no law that says you have to carry ID on you. And yet, I mean, if you're in a car and you're a passenger, why should you have to supply any kind of identification? Of course, they're going to say, well, it's in case you're an illegal alien or something like that. If they want to deal with illegal aliens, you would think that they would be doing more on the borders, but, they stop people. They stop people in cars and use this as an excuse. I don't care how you feel about the immigration issue. I mean, it is kind of an excuse. I don't think there's too many people crossing the border using the freeways to do it. Now, the thing is that, again, it's getting people used to the idea that it's okay, that the government has a right to stop you and so forth. I remember back, it was around the year 2000, may have been 1999. I don't remember completely. But there was this issue in regards to, well, people were thinking that the NSA was basically looking into people's emails. And I remember there was this campaign. It was going to be called Jam the MSA or something like that. And essentially, it was sort of seen as a conspiracy theory. People were thinking that, okay, well, yeah, they're listening to our phone calls. Sure, right. Well, it's been proven right. But the thing is, when this first came out, people were like, oh, you've got to be joking. No way people would do that. And then later, I went on a trip to China with some people, and some of them were thinking about buying mobile phones because you could get them really cheap there. And then there was a couple of people in the group that were saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe the Chinese government listens in on your phone conversations. They might put something into the phone. I had no evidence whether they did that or not. I don't have any evidence whether they do so or not today. But the thing is, that was enough to cause some people not to want to buy anything, not to buy a phone. Now, that's kind of interesting in the sense that today, look at how things have changed. I mean, Edward Snowden pretty much proved that this is going on. Okay? And that's why they want to go after him. He just said, well, here's what they're doing. They're gathering information. He never let out any information saying, hey, terrorist, or something like that. Look what the government's doing. All he did was let the information out that people are being monitored by the government, and all this data is saved. Now, the weird thing is, the government, even today, even after it's been proven that they are doing it, they still come out and say, no, not happening. And then you got people that justify it. I mean, you got people like, who is it? Jeb Bush, and I heard that, there's another one of the ones that came out and said that this was justified. And essentially, the, it's a situation though where most Americans don't even care. I mean, there's issues relating to sports, they care. There's issues related to celebrities, they care. Or at least they're told to care. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe the corporate media is trying to get them to care about these issues and focus their attention on other things. Because really it is true. What you see on the front page of a newspaper, for instance, is what you feel is the most important. If you find that it's on page 27 of section D in the newspaper, for those of you who still use newspapers, then you feel like it's probably not a major issue. Or if you see something reported in, let's say, the Washington Times or the Washington Post or the New York Times, it's probably going to be seen as more important than if it's reported in a local newspaper or an alternative newspaper. That's just the way people see it in reference to how they interpret these kinds of things. And so, yeah, people are accepting this sort of thing. But now let's take a look at some really interesting aspects of this. And I just thought I would throw out some quotes here. The thing that really inspired me to deal with this particular issue is that I heard something that was from, England, of all places. And there's a quote here. It was in the Independent, the UK Independent, and it's David Cameron. He just won election. I'm not going to go into that. He didn't get a majority of votes. So the next time people from England might say something, if you encounter one about the way our electoral college in the United States operates, then you could easily ask them about how the system elected David Cameron in the last election with something like 37% of the vote. So anyway, Cameron was quoted, and it's gone around the internet a little bit. For too long, we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. Let me repeat that for you. Okay, it's right here. For too long, we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. Now, that should scare people, the idea that you're kind of saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's been just a little bit too much freedom. Now, I'm going to contrast that and with someone who had some beefs with the way the British government was set up about 220 or 30 years ago, and that was Thomas Jefferson, where he stated that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. He had a whole bunch of excellent quotes about freedom and liberty. I would really, really encourage people to look those up. Just type in Thomas Jefferson, freedom and liberty. But there was another individual, Benjamin Franklin, the one I often quote on this show, question authority. He said it. That in fact he said that it was the right and duty of a patriot to question authority. And he said something else here that's a little bit, a little bit more addressing David Cameron. And that was, any society that will give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither, and they will lose both. Okay, what does he mean by that? And what does Jefferson mean about eternal vigilance? You see, the problem I think you have when it comes to government is that essentially essentially, you put people in government or any institution, and you're trying to figure out what you can do that's different, or how to get the job done that you're given. And so essentially, no matter what you do, I don't care if you're on the student government of a high school, okay? The thing is that if you just go in saying, well, I just want to keep the status quo, let's just keep things are running okay, let's just keep them running okay, people are going to look at you like, well, why are you here? I mean, there's an assumption built in to government at all levels that you have to do something, you need to change something. You need to pass some laws. You need to institute something, or else you're not doing your job. Well, in kind of don't you think that's actually kind of saying, well, wait a minute, your role is to change what might already be pretty good? So when Jefferson said you have to have eternal vigilance, he was basically saying the people have to keep an eye on what the government's doing at all times. And the reason why the founding fathers of the United States set government up the way they did, where it was all broken up into different branches, was because they knew that there was always, well, just a regular person. You know that whole, what was it, Burke, who said the power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely? There was a recognition that even good people, if given power, will exercise unrighteous dominion over other people. Now think about if you elect people who are driven by ambition and power in the first place. Well, their goal is going to be to try to change things for the worse when it comes to freedom and liberty. Now, I'm not making any comments. I'm not saying that all government people are necessarily evil, but the process of basically just being in the legislature in general will mean that you should keep an eye on what people are doing, because they may be passing laws that will take a little bit of your liberty away. And they're not going to just suddenly, it's not like George Bush or Barack Obama or David Cameron are all of a sudden going to say, hey, look, I just found a copy of 1984, and it looks like a pretty good book when it comes to government. Well, no, I'm not saying that they would actually say that. Anyway, I am saying that it's very easy for government leaders to take the easy way out and basically say, oh, well, we need to take away a little bit of freedom here or liberty there because it's for the good of the masses. It's for the good of the body politic, so to speak. But the thing is, then, that's just like our triathlete who, skips exercise and eats a little too much after the big win. He or she is going to finally reach a stage where they may as well never have been in the triathlon because they'll be totally out of shape. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen eventually. And that's why Jefferson said you can't just passively sit by. Even I don't have the quote in front of me, but John F. Kennedy said that the weakest link in a chain, in reference to democracy, is the most uninformed person, because they can still vote. Now, the thing is, I'm not saying that there's an IQ scale when it comes to being uninformed. Now, there's some pretty smart people out there that really don't take the time to look up things, but there's also a lot of people out there who really just, they trust their government. And that's not a good idea. That is really not going to be something that is going to benefit people in the long run. And so oh yeah, sorry about that. I got interrupted by a phone call there in the middle of taping this. But anyway, the thing that we have to look at is that, Well, I'm going to quote something from Thomas Paine here before I go on. I lost kind of train of thought. Those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. So yes, to keep a democracy, to keep freedom, you need to exercise your freedoms. You need to exercise your rights, and you need to expect them, or else each generation will have a little bit less, and they will expect a little bit less. And the thing is that we take a look at what I said before. You know, you have checkpoints for everything now. You have people, you know that you're being listened to. And then people just share really, really personal information on Facebook and so forth. And so I think we're actually developing a system in which eventually we're going to wind up looking like what was the name of that Christian Bale movie? Equilibrium. Okay? I mean, when I first saw Equilibrium, I was thinking, whoa, that's a really dystopian movie. And then now I keep thinking about when they have the crowds there and they've got the police dressed up in those black riot gear uniforms, and you've got those blimps that are flying over and monitoring people. You know, nowadays we kind of live in that. We're kind of getting into that kind of weird thing about accepting armored trucks going down the street. This is the United States, of course. You wouldn't see this so much in Europe yet. But the thing is that in the United States, you know, people are getting used to the idea that their police department might own an attack helicopter. Their police department might own automatic weapons. I'm not talking about, you know, the kind that people go out and hunt with and stuff like that, or go target practicing or whatever. I'm talking about the kind that people use in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, you know, police departments being given those by the military. And all of these other gadgets that, you know, what's a police department need in a small town need with a tank? That just does not seem like something that you would need. Now, lastly, I would like to zero in on a quote from John Adams. But a constitutional government, once changed from freedom, can never be restored. Liberty, once lost, is lost forever. Do you know, right now, you know, you've got some of the Republicans running for office who are basically saying, oh, wait, we can't do anything with our Patriot Act. We can't scrap that. So anyway, again, got cut off by incoming call there. The thing is that once you give up on freedom, once you hand something over, just like with the Patriot Act, just like with NSA snooping, it would be, it would be really, really difficult to then pull it back. Not because it's the wrong thing to do, but it's just like when you have these legislatures in which the legislator wants to look really tough on drugs, so, you know, they come up with some sort of 3 strikes, you're out, you know, so essentially, you know, you wind up with people that get caught with marijuana and they're serving these horrendous jail sentences for it because, you know, you want to pass laws that make it look like you're getting tough. And the same has now happened in regards to national security, quote unquote. And so there are some of the candidates for president right now are saying we need to scale back things. Rubio, Bush, you know, Clinton, I don't think you're going to get much of a change in the way the system is if any of those guys get elected. And that's kind of sad. And some of the others, I mean, you know, Rand Paul, he's promised to change it. But the thing is that, again, even if you did get Rand Paul in, you'd still have the Congress and the Senate that's still trying to look tough, both the Democrats and Republicans, and I'm not sure whether you could really get rid of it. So, anyway, the thing is, watch out when you hear people say, well, maybe we need to kind of scale back on this freedom. Because once it is lost, just like going back to our triathlete, suddenly our triathlete realizes, oh my gosh, my blood pressure's up, my heart rate's up, my cholesterol's up, I better exercise. He or she's not going to gain that triathlete body back overnight. It's going to take a long and grueling process to get there. So the thing is that it's better to make sure that we keep our eyes on what's going on. We focus, we communicate to others, we communicate to our representatives, and do our best so that, maybe 20 years from now when your kids or grandkids are saying, wow, when did America change, or whatever country you're in? Why did it change like this? Why do we have this system now? And you don't want to be the one saying, well, it just happened, because you didn't do anything to try stopping it, working within the political system to try to make positive change, or to preserve the freedoms that exist today. So anyway, well, that's just some things I would like you to think about. And, thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you next week here at UCY TV's Unlock the Door Radio, here with Michael Cross.
You may not realize it, but artificial intelligence is all around us. We rely on smart machines to scan our checks at ATMs, to navigate us on road trips, and much more. The field of artificial intelligence is pushing new boundaries. Maurice Srinivasan has the first in a series of stories about it and the concerns over where it may lead.
Elon Musk, founder and CEO of Tesla Motors and SpaceX, is not exactly a Luddite bent on stopping the advance of technology. But he says AI poses a potential threat more dangerous than nuclear weapons.
I think we should be very careful about artificial intelligence. If I were to guess at what our biggest existential threat is, it's probably that. And with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon.
Musk recently donated $10 million to the Future of Life Institute, which is focused on keeping AI research beneficial to humanity. Add his voice to a list of bright minds like physicist Stephen Hawking, Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and several leaders in the field of artificial intelligence. Among them, Stuart Russell, who heads the AI lab at the University of California, Berkeley.
What concerns you about how artificial intelligence is already being used or will be used shortly?
In the near term, the biggest problem is the development of autonomous weapons. Everyone knows about drones. Drones are remotely piloted. They're not robots in a real sense. So there's a person looking through the camera that's on the aircraft and deciding when to fire. An autonomous weapon would do all of that itself. So it chooses where to go, it decides what the target is, and it decides when to fire.
He's concerned about weapons like the British Taranis. It's featured in this promotional video by BAE Systems, a former NewsHour underwriter. The Taranis is currently operated remotely by humans, but this drone is outfitted with artificial intelligence and will be capable of operating fully autonomously. Russell testified to the United Nations, which is considering a ban on such weapons that can target and kill humans without requiring a person to pull the trigger.
I think there's a fundamental moral issue about whether it's right for a machine to decide to kill a person. It's bad enough that people are deciding to kill people, but at least they have perhaps some moral argument.
The Anti-Media Radio, your host Nick Burnaby here on UCY.tv.